That night, the sky over Ukraine shone like never before. A green flash cut through the darkness, and for a moment it seemed beautiful. But it wasn't the northern lights. It was the beginning of the end. While families slept peacefully in Pripyat, the heart of the Chernobyl plant exploded, releasing into the air something no one could see, touch or escape, death in the form of light. The city of Pripyat slept in silence. More than 50,000 people lived there, scientists, workers, children. It was a model city, a pride of the Soviet regime, built to serve the powerful Chernobyl nuclear plant. Nothing seemed out of place. But inside reactor number 4, something was about to get out of control. That night, a team of engineers was performing a safety test, a simple simulation to check if the reactor could cool itself in the event of a power failure. But arrogance and haste combined with human error, and the result was a nuclear bomb without a warhead. At 1:23 a.m., engineer Anatoly Dyatlov ignored the alarms and continued the test. Automatic systems were manually shut down. The reactor's power plummeted, and to compensate, they increased the energy flow. The already unstable reactor entered a state of uncontrollable reaction. Within seconds, the uranium core began to melt. Internal pressure rose to absurd levels. Then, 2 consecutive explosions shook the night. The reactor's more than 1,000-ton lid was thrown into the air. A green flash illuminated the sky. And from the heart of the plant, thousands of radioactive fragments were hurled in all directions. What no one knew was that the beautiful glow on the horizon was pure radiation. Residents woke to the sound of the explosion and ran to their windows. They saw a blue and green beam slicing through the air, a hypnotic spectacle. Some climbed onto rooftops to observe. Others, curious, walked toward the site. They didn't know, but every breath was poisoning them. Gamma radiation was everywhere, invisible, silent, relentless. Firefighters were the first to arrive. They thought they were fighting a normal fire. Without special clothing, they touched with bare hands the glowing pieces of graphite ejected by the reactor. Minutes later, they began to taste metal in their mouths, feel nausea and suffer burns that came from the inside out. Yet, they continued fighting the fire. These men, many of them barely in their 20s, would be remembered as the forgotten heroes of Chernobyl. Meanwhile, life in Pripyat continued. Children played in the parks, couples had picnics, and a strange glow hovered over the city. Some residents noticed the heavy air, the metallic smell, their eyes burning. But the government said, it's just a small fire. Nothing serious. No one knew that at that moment, radiation in Pripyat was 400 times higher than the Hiroshima bomb. Inside the Kremlin offices, the word Chernobyl began to circulate. But the order was clear: absolute secrecy. Authorities did not evacuate the city. They feared panic, international humiliation, and above all, the loss of the Soviet Union's perfect image. While the government hid the truth, radioactive clouds crossed borders, contaminating forests, rivers, and people in entire countries. In Sweden, scientists noticed abnormal radiation levels on their clothing and discovered that the problem came from Eastern Europe. It was only then, 36 hours after the explosion, that the world discovered what had happened at Chernobyl. The explosion had destroyed the reactor, yes, but the radioactive fire was still burning. If it was not contained, another even larger explosion could vaporize entire cities, spreading contamination across Europe. And it was then that the fate of millions depended on a small group of men. Men who knew they would not return alive. In the first hours after the Reactor 4 explosion, no one understood the true scale of the disaster. The city of Pripyat still slept under an invisible rain of radioactive particles, while firefighters battled flames that could not be extinguished. But the fire was not the greatest danger. Beneath the reactor, a new nightmare was forming. Thousands of liters of cooling water had accumulated in the lower chambers. If the glowing molten core came into contact with that water, the result would be a thermonuclear explosion, hundreds of times more devastating than the first. This second explosion could vaporize half of Ukraine, contaminate the Dnieper River, and spread deadly radiation across Europe. The end of the continent was imminent. Chernobyl scientists knew there was only one solution. Someone had to enter under the reactor and manually open the valves to drain the water. But who could enter one of the most radioactive places on Earth? Knowing death was certain, then 3 men stepped forward. 3 engineers who worked at the plant and knew every pipe, every dark corridor of that labyrinth. They were Alexei Ananenko, Valery Bespalov, and Boris Baranov. They knew their chances were nearly zero. Still, they signed their own fate with courage and silence. The night was suffocating. With weak flashlights and rubber suits that offered little protection from radiation, the 3 men walked through the dark, contaminated water. Each step echoed like a countdown. The flashlight beams flickered, until one failed. The sound of radioactive dripping mixed with the distant hum of the still-burning reactor. They knew, if the flashlights went out, they would be blind in the radioactive darkness, but they pressed on. Guided only by the sound of metal pipes and the memory of what they had studied for years. After nearly 20 minutes of searching, they found the valves. With trembling, burned hands, they opened the drainage flow. The water began to descend, and the world escaped annihilation. When they emerged, their faces were pale, their clothes smoked. A few hours later, they were taken to a Moscow hospital, where doctors couldn't even touch them without double gloves. Their bodies were contaminated to the limit. Internal organs were literally melting, yet none of them regretted it. Someone had to do it. And we did, Ananenko reportedly said, just before being taken to the isolation ward. For years, the Soviet government denied the mission existed, trying to hide the heroism of those men. Only decades later were their names officially recognized as the saviors of Europe. Even after the sacrifice of the 3 engineers, the fire in Reactor 4 continued. Tons of burning graphite and uranium still released radiation into the air. Internal temperatures reached 2,000 degrees C. Helicopters began to fly over the reactor, dropping sand, lead, and boron to try to smother the flames. Pilots flew just meters above the crater, through radioactive smoke, knowing that every minute in the air cost years of life. Many of them died days later. But thanks to these suicidal flights, the fire began to subside. Meanwhile, the city of Pripyat had still not been evacuated. Authorities, fearing panic, waited almost 2 full days before acting. On the morning of April 27th, military buses began to arrive. Men in masks and black uniforms ordered residents to prepare to leave. It will be only for a few days. Take documents and light clothing. No one knew they would never return. Children watched from windows as empty parks, abandoned toys, and disoriented dogs ran through the streets. Within a few hours, Pripyat became a ghost town. While the Soviets tried to hide the disaster, American satellites captured images of the destroyed reactor. The truth could no longer be denied. The international press demanded answers, and the name Chernobyl began to echo across the globe. But what no one knew was that, even after the fire and evacuation, the worst was not over. Inside the destroyed reactor, something new was forming. A living, pulsating mass that seemed to grow over time. In the ruins of Reactor 4, the silence was deadly. The radioactive smoke had dissipated, but something remained alive inside. A dense, pulsating, glowing mass made of molten uranium, sand, lead, and graphite. Scientists could not explain it, but they knew the essential. If anyone approached too closely, they would die within minutes. This radiation creature became known as the elephant's foot, and to this day, it is one of the deadliest substances ever created by humans. After the explosion, the reactor core had completely melted. The radioactive mixture, as hot as lava, penetrated the concrete floors, slowly descending into the plant's underground tunnels. There it began to solidify, forming grotesque structures resembling melted flesh and smoking glass. When engineers finally sent cameras to investigate, they discovered something that seemed to breathe. Radiation readings were so high that the camera lenses burned within seconds. The material emitted over 10,000 roentgens per hour, enough to kill a human in less than 3 minutes. And the most terrifying part was that the elephant's foot was still active. The mass generated its own heat, emitted sounds, and continued to move slowly, as if it had consciousness. The Soviets needed to know if that mass could still cause another nuclear reaction. If the elephant's foot came into contact with underground water, it could explode again, contaminating rivers and soil for centuries. But no one could get close, so they sent military robots. None survived for more than a few hours. Circuits burned, cameras froze, and motors simply melted. With no alternative, the government called new human volunteers. Men who knew that every second inside the plant meant years of life lost. Wearing improvised lead suits, respirators, and incomprehensible courage, they entered the reactor's bowels. The air was heavy, hot, almost solid. Melted walls dripped like wax, and the sound of the Geiger counter was deafening. One of them described the scene. It looked like hell, and hell had a body. At the end of a destroyed corridor, they saw the mass, a giant twisted block of dark gray color and metallic shine. It looked like the wrinkled skin of an elephant, hence the name. One scientist approached and tried to take a photograph. The camera burned before the click. The film melted inside the equipment. Even so, they managed to capture a single blurry image, the first photo of the elephant's foot, taken in 1986. This image would become a symbol of human destruction. The man who took the photo died 2 weeks later. Later analyses revealed that the elephant's foot was made of corium, a substance created when molten nuclear fuel mixes with concrete and metals from the structure. It is a form of mineral life, with properties so unstable that it still emits radiation today. For decades, scientists tried to approach the mass to study it. Even with modern robots and reinforced shields, measurements remain alarming. The elephant's foot has lost some of its heat and energy, but can still kill any living being that touches it. Chernobyl was not just a technological tragedy, it was the portrait of human pride pushed to its limits. A blind race for power, hidden under the veil of propaganda. Thousands of lives sacrificed to maintain an invincible image. The elephant's foot is the physical result of that pride, a living, radioactive and eternal reminder of what happens when man plays God. To this day, it remains there, in the depths of the concrete sarcophagus, emitting radiation and reminding the world that destruction does not need bombs, only silence and ego. Over the months, the area around the plant became uninhabitable. Forests died and regrew deformed. Mutant animals were seen by researchers, and the city of Pripyat remained frozen in time. Stopped clocks, abandoned toys, and the sound of the wind between empty buildings. The world began to understand that Chernobyl was not just an accident, but a warning. A brutal reminder that radiation cannot be seen, smelled, and never completely disappears. Decades have passed since that fateful night of April 26, 1986. The green flash that cut across Pripyat's sky became a memory, but its shadow remains alive. Chernobyl is not just a place. It is a symbol of what humanity must never forget. The exclusion zone, extending 30 kilometers around the reactor, should have been dead. And in a way it is. But nature, resilient, began reclaiming its territory. Forests grow over abandoned houses. Wild animals roam empty streets, indifferent to human time. However, not everything returned to normal. Mutant species emerged, small signs of radiation altering DNA. Researchers found birds with deformed wings, fish with strange colors, and even animals with tumors. The land itself is still alive and dangerous. The soil carries radiation doses that can kill within hours. The reactor, even confined by the sarcophagus, continues to release small radioactive particles. Chernobyl today is a silent monument to human arrogance and error. The legacy of the disaster goes far beyond the exclusion zone. Thousands of people suffered and continue to suffer radiation-related illnesses, thyroid cancer, especially in children, leukemia and other rare cancers, infertility and congenital defects in subsequent generations. Beyond invisible death, there is psychological trauma, displaced families, lost cities, and memories frozen in time. What was a national pride became a bitter, painful memory. Chernobyl is not just a horror story. It is a warning for all humanity. Technology without responsibility can kill millions. Secrecy and pride can be as lethal as radiation itself. Silent heroes like Alexei, Valery, and Boris show that courage is what prevents total tragedy. Every piece of concrete, every mutant tree, every radioactive grain of sand tells the story of a world that tried to play God and almost lost everything. Pripyat remains frozen in 1986. The schools, the parks, the stadium, all abandoned. Tourists visit with masks and distancing, photographing shadows and silence. The wind carries the metallic smell of the past, and radiation remains invisible. Even so, the world does not forget. Documentaries, films, and books tell the story. Chernobyl entered global culture as a symbol of nuclear danger and human resilience. What began with a green flash ended as an eternal lesson. Destruction does not need war. It can come from pride, negligence, and the unknown. Today, Chernobyl is more than ruins. It is a living memorial remembering every death, every hero, and every mistake that could have been avoided. It is not fire that destroys us, but our blindness to the invisible danger. If you want to keep exploring true stories that challenge the mind and chill the soul, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Each video brings mysteries, tragedies, and forgotten heroes. Stories the world doesn't want you to forget.